We will discuss Hugging Face dataset in this video. We need data for training or fine-tuning any AI model. And in order to use the data for training and fine-tuning, we first of all need to curate the data. We can't just take any random data. We need to have enough volume, and the data has to be correct, accurate, and unbiased. And we also need to have diversified data. So during training, the model will be able to recognize the pattern in the data, and it will be able to recognize similar data in the future, even if the data is not used in the training process. So that is why we need to curate this data. Okay, the curated data for training is called a dataset. And if you want to curate this data every time you are actually training a model, then it is going to take significant amount of time and effort as well, which is not feasible for every AI developer. So a better option would be to use other AI developers' data if the data is suitable for your training process. And this is what Hugging Face enables us to do. It enables collaboration. You'll be able to share your dataset with others, so they'll be able to use your dataset without curating it from scratch. And also, you can consume someone else's dataset as long as it is suitable for your AI training. In Hugging Face, dataset is nothing but a Git repository. Under the hood, it is just a Git repository. So you'll be able to interact with it using Git CLI or Hugging Face Hub CLI, or there is a dedicated library from Hugging Face called Datasets library, and you can use this Datasets library to programmatically interface with the datasets available in Hugging Face. Hugging Face supports many different file formats. It includes TXT file, CSV file, and there is a special format called Parquet, and it supports JSON line format, and it also supports other media types like MP3 for audio and JPEG for images. And because this is just a Git repository under the hood, you'll be able to structure the files and folders in any way that you like. You can create multiple folders to keep the files, or you can even have flat files at root of the repository. When it comes to datasets, normally we will have different splits of the data for different purposes. So when you have dataset for training, you won't use the entire dataset for training. You need to use some of the dataset for training, and you also need to set aside some of the data for testing. Normally it will be 70-30 split. You'll use 70% of the data for training and 30% of the data for testing. In some cases, you'll also split the test data into another subgroup called the validate dataset. So these are three different common splits of the datasets that you'll see. And with Hugging Face dataset, you'll be able to easily create these splits. So there are different ways to create the split. So one of the option is just by using the file name. So you can have one file name called train.csv, which represents the training split, and another one called test.csv, which represents your test split. Or you can even have directory based splits. So you can have one directory called test for your testing datasets and another directory called train for your training datasets, and you can put all your files in each of those folders, which indicates the training and test datasets. Or if you don't want to use file name or directory name based splits, you can create files in any way that you like within your Git repository, and you can create a section within your README file, which is the YAML configuration section. And in this section, you can specify which files or folders belong to training split and which files and folders belong to test set. So that is also another option which is possible. And one of the advantage of using datasets from Hugging Face is that it uses efficient in-memory data format. The data format used by datasets is called Apache Arrow format. This is in-memory format as opposed to storage format. So these are the storage formats. So these formats will be used for storing your files in the Git repository or in your local machine. But Apache Arrow format is the in-memory format, and this is the format which will be used when the data is being processed, when it is loaded into the memory for processing. And this particular Apache Arrow format is optimized for speed and efficiency. It uses memory mapped on disk cache, which means even if you are dealing with a large data set with a machine that doesn't have large memory, will still be able to use the dataset efficiently because the data will be cached on disk and they'll be memory mapped, which means the processing units like CPUs and GPUs will be able to access the data from disk directly without loading them into RAM-like memory first. And this Apache Arrow format is called columnar format because it uses data as a columns as opposed to rows. So if you see here, this is the typical row-based storage. This is a normal table-like storage where each row represents a record, right? But in columnar format, what we will do is we will store the data like this. We'll have each of the columns and we will store all the values of that particular column like this. So this is called a columnar format, and this is the format used by Apache Arrow format. And this format is also used by another storage file format called Parquet. So Parquet is also columnar format, but this is for storing the data on a disk, not for processing it on memory or loading it on memory. Okay, so that is what this Parquet format is. Now let's go to Hugging Face Hub and explore data sets there. And finally, we'll see an example of how to load a particular dataset from Hugging Face using Datasets library. Okay, I am here in Hugging Face Hub now, and we can see that we have datasets here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into this dataset. Here we'll be able to see all the datasets available for us to use. So we have nearly 400,000 datasets here. And similar to models, we'll be able to filter the dataset using these modalities here and tasks as well. So it supports datasets for many different tasks, and we'll be able to filter the datasets by tasks as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search for a particular dataset called IMDb dataset. And in here, you'll be able to see we have this particular dataset from Stanford NLP called IMDb. And I'm going to open this particular dataset. And very similar to model, we'll be able to see the task for which this particular dataset is suitable, which is text classification. And we can also see the modality. So this is actually text datasets. So the modality is only text, and we can see the format supported by this particular dataset. So this particular dataset is stored in Parquet format. But if the dataset is available in multiple formats, we'll be able to see them here. And we can see that this is an English language dataset, and this dataset is usually used for sentiment classification. So that is what we see here. And we can also see here that this particular dataset can be consumed by the datasets library from Hugging Face, and we can also use pandas, and there are some other libraries supported as well. And if you see here on the dataset card, we have some useful information about this dataset, and we can also preview this dataset. So this is called Dataset Viewer, and using this viewer, we'll be able to preview this dataset. And you can see here that we have a text column that has some text, and we also have a label column, and the label indicates whether this text is a positive text or a negative text. So these kind of basic information can be explored on the Dataset Viewer itself. And if I scroll down, we'll be able to see some additional information that will be useful when we are exploring this dataset. So one of the thing is you can see that it shows the dataset file sizes. So this might be useful for you to decide if you want to explore this dataset or not. And if we go further down, it shows the data fields here. So like we have seen previously, this has two data fields. One is the text data field, which is basically the text column. And the second one is the label data field, which is basically the label column with two different possible values, 0 for negative and 1 for positive. So these kind of useful information can be seen in the dataset card. Okay. And you can use this Dataset Studio to explore the data. You can even use SQL query to explore this data. So I'm not going to go into the details of that now. But if we go to this Files tab, like I said previously, dataset is nothing but a Git repository. So you'll be able to see all the files in here. So we have this folder called plain text that has all the files of this particular dataset. And we also have some Git attributes file, and we also have readme file. So in here, if you see, the splits are not specified by the folder and file name convention, which means the splits are specified in the readme file as a YAML configuration. So if I open this readme file, we'll be able to see here that the splits are specified as YAML config. If I scroll here, we'll be able to see a config section here, And this config section indicates which files are training split and which files are test split. And there is another unconventional split here called unsupervised, and which files belongs to this unsupervised split. Okay, so this is how this particular data set is split. Okay, so if I go back, and within this community tab, you can see discussions within the community. Okay, so let me go back to the dataset card page, and in here you can see that we have this option for using this dataset. And if I click on this, we have different options to use this particular dataset. One of them is datasets library from Hugging Face. So if I click on this, we'll be able to see a simple code to load and use this particular dataset. So in order to use this, we first need to install this datasets library. Once the datasets library is installed, it is as easy as just this one line of code to start using this particular dataset for your training and fine-tuning process. Okay, now let's go to Visual Studio Code and see a very simple example of how to use this particular dataset. But if you need more information, then you can just go to this documentation section of Hugging Face, and you can find the documentation for datasets library in here. So if I scroll to this core ML libraries, in here we'll be able to see a section for datasets. And if you go in here, you'll be able to find a lot more detail than what I'll be showing next. Okay, with that, let's go to Visual Studio Code now. I am here in the Visual Studio Code now, and the first thing I have done is I have installed this datasets library from Hugging Face. Okay, so I have used pip to install that. Once that is installed, I have created a very simple program to load this IMDb datasets that we have seen just now. So I'm just going to run this and see what happens. And you can see here that the dataset has been loaded, and it shows that it has three different splits called train, test, and unsupervised. And it shows the number of rows available in each of those datasets, which is 25,000, 25,000, and 50,000. And it shows the features available in those datasets. Features are nothing but the column names. So we had two columns, one called text and another one called label. So we are able to see them here. Okay. Now let's see how we can load just one of the splits. We can see that we have a split called training or train, and I'm just going to show you how to load only that particular split. So here, when loading the dataset using load underscore dataset, I'm specifying the dataset, then I'm also specifying another parameter called split, and then I'm specifying the name of the split, which is train. So if I run this, it will only load the training split of the dataset. As you can see here, it has only loaded the training split of the dataset, which has 25,000 rows. Okay. And because I'm also printing the features here, we are able to see the features here. And this is a little bit more informative. It shows the column name, and it also shows the type of the column, and it also indicates whether this is an ID column or not. And for the label column, because this is actually a categorical data, we are able to see the two different possibilities, which are negative and positive. Okay, let's next see how we can load a particular data point. So if I want to inspect a particular data point, let's see how we can see that. Let me just uncomment this. And if I run this again, this will actually show me a one particular data point from my data set. And again, I'm actually loading the data set from the training split. So you can see here that it has loaded a particular data point. So it includes the text column, and it also includes the label column here. But we have just loaded one particular data point from the entire training data set split. Okay. And this data set also supports slicing. So let's see a very simple example for that slicing. So I'm just going to comment this and uncomment this. What I'm doing here is I am taking two items from the data set from the beginning. So that is what the slicing operation indicates. So if I run this, we'll be able to see two data items. So I'm just going to run this. If I scroll up here, we'll be able to see text column here. This has two different values. And if I scroll to the bottom, we'll be able to see label column as well. And this has two different values as well. Okay, which means we have loaded two separate data items. Okay, so there is so much that you can do with this datasets library. I only scratched the surface of it, but you'll be able to go and explore all the things that are possible using the documentation page that I have showed you earlier. Okay, so that is all I wanted to share in this video. I hope this is useful. Thank you.